All right, hi everybody. Today I'm sitting down with Paul Drohan. He is a creative director of a handful of awesome agencies. We know each other from back at Digitaria, which is now Mirum. Great to have him here. Amazing designer and really pioneering in the space of AI art, which is what we're going to talk about today. Paul, thanks for joining. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit more about yourself and kind of what got you here?
Yeah, Javan, thank you so much. Really want to appreciate the invite to participate
Hmm.
in this conversation. I mean, it's exciting times, man. We've so to give a little bit of a background, I've been doing this for a few decades. I graduated uh, from San Diego City College in 1997, so it was almost like the age of websites, like the beginning of websites back then. So there was a lot of fun new things in the world of technology, even in 1997. And so I was always very attracted to new technology. I mean, my background is visual design, like graphic design, and branding. Like that's sort of my core foundation. And like I mentioned, I've always been attracted to new technology. So when my interest started gravitating back then to websites and Flash, you know, I know you remember Flash.
Oh yeah,
Flash got killed by Steve
Action
Jobs.
script.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I gravitated to digital back in the day in the early 2000s. And most of my career has followed the path of like digital branding and heavy websites. And that's where you and I crossed paths back in the day when you were working at Digitaria. And I was working up in Orange County at Jets Interactive and in another small agency called Two Advance. And I remember you sent me an email or something,
Yeah.
just kind of introducing like yourself and like, hey, and we got talking, and that's whenever I ended up starting at Digitaria back in the day, working with you. And I spent 16 years from Digitaria to the transition to Mirror. And I think we started off as maybe about 20 people, maybe like whenever I started, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Playing
20
basketball on
people.
those crooked, weird steps out in the front of the
Yeah.
office.
The whole floor was kind of slanted at
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
office.
Yep. That place was
And
awesome.
I think I always tell people that office was haunted
Oh yeah.
because whenever I'd work late, there would always be weird stuff happening in that
That
office.
basement. There's stuff down there. Did you ever go down in the basement? That place is
Yes, I
creepy.
did. It was
Yeah.
super creepy,
Yeah.
real creepy. So just to kind of fast track it, was there for 16 years. I retired from Miram in 2018, and I decided to focus on my wife and I's business. We ended up moving to the East Coast, and we started a few businesses out there. One of them is her business, Mucho Mucho Taco.
Yeah.
This is one of the hats, and I was consulting, brand consulting again. And then I went to a company called Folklore from 2020 to the beginning of this year, January. I left Folklore. And that was an incredible adventure. They're a great agency, primarily like digital branding. And I went back to consulting. And now I'm working with a local San Diego creative like agency called Tavo. And they're a startup creative agency. So I am their VP of creative now, and I'm helping them out.
It's awesome. Yeah, I feel like my biggest legacy with Digitaria was getting in touch with you and getting you guys synced up. And dude, 16 years, dude, that's
Oh
awesome, man.
man, it was awesome working with you. Like, it
It's fun.
wasn't very long, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, we did some. That was a cool period of time, and we got to do some Saturday Night Live stuff. We got to do Tailor Made. Like, that was a good little run.
Well, especially the invisible children work that we were doing was so progressive.
Yeah, that was fun. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
Well, let's keep going on the idea of progressive. I think, a lot of changes in the industry over the last few years, and especially with this idea of AI, and not just AI as a tool for data and a tool for speeding things up, but actually for art, being able to build copy, build content, photography, now even video. It's still progressing, but I think if you look over the last couple of years, you have to recognize that it is going to be one of those technologies that absolutely revolutionizes the space, right? I think back to typewriters and digital cameras, and
The
there's just
computer.
times when you look at your industry and you go, "This is absolutely going to change everything." And I think AI as an art form is becoming that. And I think you were one of the pioneers. You're jumping in with both feet and kind of saying, "Hey, look, this is going to be a new tool that we can use to be wildly creative." And so it's been fun to watch you do that. Like I don't know that I have that many other artists that I watch where I'm impressed with what's being done. It's more proof of concept, right? Like, hey, look, we can make a photograph of people that don't exist. But I think the work that you're doing is progressing it to a point where it is back to being a legitimate art form. So I want to kind of unpack that a little bit for people listening, right? Like how you got started, what was interesting, and we'll get to some tips down the road here. But let's start with like, what about it? Like, when did it actually feel like it was legitimate, right? Like it was something that you knew you wanted to pursue.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll go back to what I mentioned in the late '90s and the early 2000s. I've always been a fan of new technology. I think it's fascinating. It allows creatives to almost be pioneers in a way that it's you get to be the person and be that pioneer based off your pursuits. So again, back in the day when websites were really kind of picking up and everything, digital was starting to be a term. There was this sense of like adventure around it, and I feel the same way with AI. It's far more controversial than I think like websites were back in the day, even though I've heard the same conversations from people like, oh, back in websites, like websites are going to destroy graphic design, right? Websites are going to like take people's jobs. They were literally saying the same stuff that you're hearing today about AI.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's going to take people's jobs and it's going to ruin our industry and this and that. And my approach is there's always something out there that's going to take somebody's job. There's always going to be something that's going to alter our industry, like you said, whether it's websites or a computer or the smartphone or responsive design.
Yeah.
Right? Or like this and that, like all the different things, or like we think about like best practices around user experience whenever we started saying that we're focusing more on user-centered design instead of design that was more kind of selfish. Those principles that came through that changed our industry. So I found the same kind of thinking around like this new technology around AI. I started seeing a wide variety of creatives using it. I was seeing artists, like this one fine artist that I follow. He's from Germany. He does these amazing sculptures. He was dabbling in AI. I started seeing designers dabbling in it. But at least in 2021 and 2022, while I was watching it, I just thought that the quality was just not there. Like for me, I was like, it's like you got people with only two fingers, right? Or now you got somebody with 10 fingers in one hand.
Hands are still a bust, man.
It's still a thing.
Computers don't get hands.
Yeah, it's so hard. So, you asked like when did I start becoming interested in it? I started becoming interested when I started seeing the quality was improving. And I asked myself, I go, can I use this in a useful way in my creative process? Like, is there some way that it can benefit my creative process? And can it bring like quality to it? So I started dabbling in Midjourney, like just having fun with it. I was learning prompts on the side, from people. I was following people, in Instagram. I was asking them for their prompts. I was reading. I started joining these groups on LinkedIn, which are probably the most helpful. And they were super like informative. Like they would just share the prompts with people. So I was reading articles. I was learning from the prompts. I was applying those. And I think like my first intention was, can I get like an emotional response from an image?
Hmm.
Like, can I create like a portrait of somebody that the emotion, they have like this emotion in their face that now you start forgetting that it's AI. You start forgetting it's technology. You're like, wow, like I
Yeah.
actually I'm in evoking, like I'm getting this like emotional response out of this image. And that's where I started truly gravitating to. It's how do I keep improving that? How do I
Yeah.
keep building on that? And that's where I was having fun with it, Javid. I was really focusing on people and like portraits or, like their, um, different ways of expressing humans. And then I was like, how can I bring this into creative process? And we started exploring that at folklore, like trying to figure out how do we apply it in certain areas.
Yeah. Yeah, I loved the experiences you were doing. I loved the shots you were doing, the masks in the subways, the Keanu Reeves, like
Yeah,
all those shots
oh
too.
my goodness.
And yeah, you want to talk about reactions, like that does at least tell you you're on the right journey, right? Like you're in the right place when you're getting people responding and freaking out. It's like, okay, I've hit a hot spot here. Um, and I think you touched on it too. Like when it got realistic enough that you couldn't tell the difference, right? Like that I think that is a trigger for a lot of the technology that's come out, right? Like when you can take a computer and print a picture, or write a book, on a computer, and it looks just like a typewriter did, right? Like that idea that you can emulate the next technology as good as the old one. A digital SLR camera, it was always like, oh, it's going to be pixely and junk. How far past that are we now, right? Like it's completely revolutionized, and very few, unless you're an artist to the core doing,
Yeah.
actual film, 35 millimeter, things like that. So you have to recognize that over time, it makes that transition. I think the prompt writing got better really quickly. And that's where I got caught too, is Midjourney, where I was doing the chat prompts, and that's fine. We'll talk a bit about the value of different things you can put into the text-based prompts. And there's a lot of value there, but the visual pieces weren't there for me either. And you would see the art and you go, look, I could tell the way
Mhm.
the coat's moving, the way the hair's moving, not good
Mhm.
enough, right? But really quickly, once I got into Midjourney, and how many it's more just that if you have the eye for it, those are the bad images. You don't regenerate those. You don't lean towards those. And I think there's a creative process that shifts a bit, right? Where you used to say, hey, this is exactly what I want to craft. um, it's hard to just tell it to craft exactly what's in your head, but you need to kind of be creative in those prompts, put them in there, and start to see what's being generated and evolve from there.
Mhm.
And it's very much like a give and take process for me
Mhm.
when I'm in mid journey, is just seeing what it thinks of, and recognizing
Mhm.
with a design eye that's amazing. Let's dig on that. Let's revise it. Let's rerun it. Which Midjourney, I don't know if you've been playing with Midjourney's beta of their um, generator, rather than going into Discord. I mean, you could generate at a speed and scale that's just phenomenal. So I kind of had that same journey. Like once I started seeing what was coming out, it just kind of blew me away. So
Yeah.
I think the next steps are now looking at like, what do we do with that, right? So I think
Mhm.
the work you were doing with folklore, I think absolutely proof of concept. Like, yes, it's great. Not just at brainstorming, right? You can ask it to throw some
Mhm.
ideas around, and then you take those and you run with them. But I think it's
Mhm.
gotten to a point now where this is production quality. This is high definition. This is stuff that can go and market, that you can, um, from an agency perspective, charge clients for the same way you would
Mhm.
to get stock photography, the same way you would for taking photo shoots. And I think in the nonprofit world, which, going back to Invisible Children, all the work we were doing to go film and to go be on location and capture
Mhm.
the work being done, but how expensive that was, and how much um, flack we got for constantly taking trips there, for spending money to tell stories. And this is an opportunity where we can solve that, right? We can say, hey, look, we don't need to do that anymore. We can craft those images, and we can craft even that footage and sell that story without going there. It's amazing. And it's really powerful for the nonprofits, but it's like anything else. We're running into a new kind of ethical space here where we say, well, what do we do to ensure that we're staying honest and true to those stories and those victims and the people that we're supporting? And so I don't know if your brain has gone there yet, but I'd be curious what you're thinking as we get to a place of kind of needing a bit of like an ethical framework around what we can
Yeah.
fake so quickly now with AI.
That's a great question because I've been asked that on the panel discussions that I've had. I've had several panel discussions and interviews on it. And that ethical topic, this is my answer that I keep repeating is transparency. Like I'm very, very transparent with my clients and also like what I put out there. I always say, like one of my little lines on Instagram or LinkedIn is this was made with AI, but concepted by a human, me.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm very, very transparent about the technology I'm using. And I've been extremely transparent with my clients around it. And what we did was at an early stage, we dug into the legal guidelines around it too. Like our at Folklore, we my my account director and also our attorney, they kind of got together and they dug into as far as like, you know, what are the copywriting issues with it? Like,
Yeah.
all that
Yeah.
stuff. So we kind of ironed that out first. And then when we went to our clients, we started introducing it to them. We had enough knowledge around like the ethical part around, the legal guidelines. And we're extremely transparent around that. Like as far as the fact of, okay, well, you can't, let's say you talk about the Keanu Reeves one, right? Which was a blew up an atomic bomb on LinkedIn that I
Yeah.
posted. Um, if you got to be very, very careful if you ever use the likeness of somebody.
Yeah.
You basically you want to avoid that as much as possible. But another thing that we were very transparent about is you don't own these images.
Hmm.
It's like stock. You don't unless you buy it from the photographer. You could probably buy it from Midjourney if you maybe contact them in some way. But then again, like you can never truly own it. So we were super transparent about that. But the clients that bought into our approach with AI, they're like, yeah, that's okay. Like we're good with it. Mall of America was one of our first paid gigs using AI over at Folklore.
Hmm.
And our main client, he basically just saw the stuff I was throwing out on LinkedIn, like my experimentations. And
Yeah.
he came to me and he goes, hey, Paul, like we got our big mall event, like our big fall fashion show coming up. And it's an important event for the mall. And I want to do something different. And what do you think about, like, do you think we could try to use AI in some way for the fall fashion show? I was like, I'm sure we could. Like, let's talk about it. So we ended up coming up with a new theme for the fall fashion show. And we used AI like Midjourney to create mood boards. So stylistic mood boards based off of the themes under the main theme. And then we did a real photo shoot. We had about 5 to 6 models. They were all shot in studio on green screen and on these different outfits based off these themes. And then we created these backgrounds in AI that matched up to the themes of the models. So there was this very seamless kind of integration of, real people, real models and AI imagery. And the client loved it. It was a big success.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a cool way to combine the two. I think too, the idea, like you said, to somebody's likeness and the concerns with it, right? Especially if you don't have rights to, you can't just make a bunch of art with somebody's likeness. But in a scenario that I could see valuable in a nonprofit space would be to actually do that with intention, right? To and emulate, you may not be able to go and get footage, but if you could get a stock photo and say, hey, let's use this person and let's get footage of them doing this and footage of them doing this. The film industry is pretty far ahead when you look at,
Mhm.
Blockbuster, they're emulating reality all day long. And I think the ethical limit would be like, you can't tell people this is a true story if it's not a true story, right? It's just a new space that we're in, right? Where we have to define like what's real and what's not. And now it's in the hands of almost any agency or intern at any organization to say, hey, that's a photo. You want a photo of that? There it is. And it's okay. Well, where did that come from? Is that a real person? Is it not? Like we have a new responsibility to communicate that. And I think to your point earlier, like as an agency, you set some rules. I almost think organizations are going to need to do the same, right? Like we decided a few years back, like you should have an inclusive, like an equity statement on your site, like a DEI policy, because this is a statement your organization should make. And I almost feel like pretty soon we're going to want to do something similar with like, here's how we use AI, right? If you're using it, you have an AI statement or it's embedded in the graphics to say, hey, look, this is what this story is. Because there's nothing wrong with telling a fictitious story if you're admitting like, hey, this is the type of stuff we support. But I think it's even more powerful if you say, hey, this is the person that this story is about, right? This is Jacob. This is what Jacob went through. This is the real story, and maybe put a blog post behind it with real photos. And then you can extend that and kind of use that image to say, hey, we need more of that story. And though we can't capture every single piece of it, we can at least visualize it for you, which we are visual creatures. We are storytelling creatures. And in order to tell a story, you need more than a photograph. But it is so hard in my line of work and in the work that 50 and 50 does and Donately does to capture those elements, right? If we could just have more components of that story, it would be so much easier to tell. So I kind of see it on the other side where I have the rights to do it. I just don't have the means to go do that photo shoot. And so something like this really allows us to extend what we've got and really continue to pull at heartstrings, as long as, like we said, we're doing it in a way that's honest to it being either a real story or an example. And I think, like you said, it's come so far that at this point, I think even just an image you can extend upon and go beyond that and really get creative and let the technology can enhance what you're working with.
And going back to the ethical thing, this has been a conversation that has come up in some of my prior discussions is, there's so much emotional like response to AI, right? This thing is AI. But what I've brought up in the past in discussions is how come there wasn't so much of this emotional response to computer generated, which is the same thing, but it's different. But I mean, when we look at commercials, even a few years ago, so much of commercials have computer generates like CG stuff in it.
Yeah.
But we never got in an uproar about that.
Right. There's no King Kong. You know what I mean? Like there's no like Godzilla marching around. We didn't ever freak out.
Yeah, nobody was like, he's not real.
Yeah,
Well,
totally.
yeah, of course he's not real, man. He's King Kong, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and I think on the big screen, we were okay with that. And now that it's coming into the real world where it's like a little bit more accessible.
Yeah.
And it's moved into a medium where I feel like I keep the idea of trust comes up a lot.
Right.
A lot of the different podcasts, a lot of the work we're doing, the shift from nonprofits and like faith-based groups, like to corporations, which when you look at Edelman's trust barometers, like people trust companies more than they trust a lot of these different organizations and people trying to do good. And so I kind of think it's converging in a space where you don't have to trust movies. You're just there for entertainment. But now this technology is moving to a place where there's maybe a little bit more friction and expectation around like, hey, like don't tell me a story that's not accurate, especially in my line of work where we're going to try to take donor dollars or get people to volunteer. If we're going to try to get you down to a homeless shelter to feed some unhoused or get you to donate to fund village somewhere. Is that okay that we show you that story in a way that is very, very emotionally appealing and very, tugs at the heartstrings, but is not real, right? That's really the gut.
Authenticity is right. Yeah. You're so right. And I also think like our society has been programmed for quite some time to be afraid of AI. Right? I mean, how many movies have we watched? How many books have we read that paints this picture around this dystopian future of AI taking over the world, right? So there, we do have to be careful when we have like some of these conversations. And I just always try to like encourage it to be positive and encourage
Yeah.
it to be like respectful and supportive. Is that new technology is always going to be there. And yes, this particular technology is phenomenal. But we also have to be careful about what we've been programmed and how to react, like how we've been programmed to react. And we've been programmed for so long to be so afraid of AI. Like Arnold Schwarzenegger is going to get electrocuted and he's going to pop up in the middle of an alley. And, it's that's it, right? That's the end of humanity.
Yeah.
Or, there's a little boy robot that is AI that Steven Spielberg, right? Like directed. And, it's like we do have to be careful. We have to understand that there's a part of society that has been programmed to a certain degree to be reactive to this
Yeah.
technology.
It's interesting. There's probably a lot of pieces to that. I think
Yeah.
there's as the tech came, right? A lot of movies that kind of put stuff in our head. I think just the age of um, the internet and hacking and security issues. Then you have like politics and news. There's so many layers that I think
Mhm.
as a culture, we kind of like are a little worked up. We got the hair on our necks kind of
Very
standing up.
sensitive.
We don't
Yes.
want to
Yeah.
bite off on anything, right? We're nervous about being taken advantage of. We're nervous about our information. And so I think AI kind of came into the market surrounded by a bunch of like, be careful. Here's what's
Yeah.
happening. Things are getting hacked. Things are getting broken. Here's crypto. Crypto's
Yeah.
it's a real currency. No, it's not a real currency. And you
Yeah.
have there's so much happening. I think the layperson just sees this as another piece of that really complex and confusing kind of technology that's coming,
Oh, oh.
and gets a little standoffish to it. So I think it's people like you that are really pushing it forward and helping people recognize like it doesn't have to be what we're thinking. It's not Terminator. It's not all
You're
this
right.
different.
Like I try to steer these conversations into my goal as a creative and how is in the purpose of having these conversations is to help people to understand that it could be a lot more approachable than what they're thinking. Whenever I have people in the audience of these discussions, like they're literally like on the edge of their seat because this topic and this conversation makes them feel so uneasy,
Yeah.
and they're so afraid that they're going to lose their job or something. And I really try to encourage that it's a lot more approachable than people think it is. Mid Journey, I'm like, just dive in, like try some prompts, or Gemini and ChatGPT, like just give it a try, and you'd be surprised how helpful it can be at
Yeah.
times. And I wouldn't say it's ever replaced working with a human. Never. What
Yeah.
it's done is it's added value to the process and helped things maybe to move along a little bit quicker than it has in the past.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's go through some of the ways that we use it. I know we're
Sure.
starting to use it a lot more and on a lot more regular basis, kind of building it into our standard operating procedures as an agency.
Yeah.
Love to hear how you're using it as well. And I think one of the easiest starting points is something like ChatGPT or
Yeah.
any other um, uh, prompt based, kind of text
Mhm.
based platform that's going to kick back written
Mhm.
language. It's probably an easier place to start. And then even just to do some of the background stuff. So I know for me, what was really easy is just asking it to do kind of research, data analysis. Hey, look at the following things. Hey, based on a bunch of information I give you, what is this industry doing, or what are the competitors doing, or what's changing in this market? And I
Mhm.
almost like step one to me was replacing Google with something that could think for a bit and
Mhm.
process back and not just have to do all of that homework. So I know for me, just research, taking information, even in our process, whether it's stakeholder interview notes or whatever else, just even giving it, hey, here's a bunch of content. Can you summarize this back to me? I think that was an interesting, okay, that's like a no brainer. It's going to speed us up. It's going to make things simpler, you know, all the way to the point where, and I think it starts to get a little more contentious. So that's why I want to talk about a handful of topics and we can kind of help people sort it out. Because some areas are easier than others. Writing content gets a little bit trickier. You can give it voice and tone. I think it's really critical that you add to your prompts, give it something to know about the client, know the following information, know the industry. The more you write, the more just kind of the prompt gets smarter and smarter and smarter. So we can, and we talked a bit about this, like, give it so much information that it actually knows the brand that we're working on and can start to advise, hey, here are things that we should put into the values or into the messaging. And it's at that point, but then writing full length content, you know, can it write blog content? Are we happy with the content that it's writing? Does Google appreciate the content? I think as of recently, the answer is mixed, maybe not. You know, the bots know what the bots are doing. So Google can kind of take that bot content and kind of de-rank it a bit. So there's so many areas to think about. So I'd love to just hear from you. Like, what are some areas that you feel like you're all in and maybe some areas that you're just kind of toying with it and it's not quite there yet?
So I'll use this current client as a really good example of why I personally leaned into the three main AIs that I use. Midjourney, Google Gemini, and ChatGPT. And I'll use this current client as an example. Very small, like, friend. I mean, not small friend. He's not small. Yeah. His agency small. It's basically him, and he's a consultant. So he's a consultant in the life science industry. Yeah. And he came to me about a year and a half ago. He was like, hey, Paul, like, always wanted to work with you. I want to redo my brand, or actually really create a brand. But, I know, like, I got to fix budget, man. Like, it's just me. Like, I'm starting off. And so we just got chatting and we talked about his budget and everything. And basically I was able to evaluate, like, okay, based off his budget, I mean, I'm going to have to do pretty much all of this stuff myself. Like, I'm not going to have a budget to hire a copywriter. I'm not going to have a budget to hire a strategist. There's no way. Like, this budget is too tight. So I was like, this is a perfect opportunity for me to try to use this tool to help me ideate and to help me create foundation for the areas that I don't really specialize in. I'm a designer, I'm a creative thinker. I'm a problem solver. I also, I'm able to paint the big picture and then help guide the talent to execute on that. Sure. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I'm a copywriter or I'm like this like really, really like expert brand strategist. So I use ChatGPT and Gemini both at the same time to help me kind of create a foundation for the brand language based off of a creative questionnaire that I always do for my clients. I do this creative questionnaire. I wrote the questions. It helps me get in the head of my client and helps them think about the business. So based off that creative questionnaire, I was able to take like his response, feed it into Gemini and ChatGPT, and give it a direction to help me create like some ideas and some foundational language for his strategy. So I took those results, a variety of them, because that's what you know, it's like, and then you alter them and then you feed them into each other. And then you start getting something you can kind of mold and work with. And then I work with my wife, because she's a writer, to help me with making sure grammar is right, like things are written right. And she helped me kind of take some of that language and we both tweaked it and got it to a place where then I was able to put it in front of the client. And he goes, yes, no. Now he massaged it. So it was extremely helpful in a situation like that where I needed to use it for a client that had a restricted budget. It was a cost saver and a time saver for me as a creative and a consultant. So when I kind of talk about like how I use it, those are some areas, man, that I found are very, very helpful as a
Yeah.
business owner. As a business owner, when you're trying to navigate timelines and budgets and things like that, it's been very helpful in those areas.
Yeah, it is a push and pull, right? You look at a budget, and I mean, very rarely do you send it over and they go, "Oh, that's the price. Great, let's go." Like
Yeah.
you gotta, okay, what can we do? How can we work on that? And that's just another lever to pull, right? I mean, you got a lot of agencies that'll just staff people overseas.
Yeah.
It all comes down to quality, right? How do we
Yes.
deliver the highest quality, the most value, the lowest price? And this
Mhm.
is one of those areas where we have a bit of a knob to turn, right? Where we could say, "Hey, look, we can
Cool.
put 5 people on this and we can
Yeah.
all do interviews and we can do stakeholder conversations and surveys and we can do some market analysis, or this is an opportunity where you tell us a handful of these things, we punch it through, we get a lot of this work done for a lot less," right? So I mean, with my foot to the fire, I think as a business owner, super
Mhm.
valuable. As a creative, which is in and of itself challenging to be both of those things at once and kind of put both of those hats on. But this is one of
Totally.
those areas where I'm like, I feel better about this in keeping quality and value than I do a lot of the other decisions or options, right? The way we staff more juniors or we recruit from college. It's like, well, this is an area where I don't see a lot of value loss, especially in some of these core uh, strategic documents and things really early on, and then all the way to the content that's created. My I don't want to get into advice just yet, but I'll throw one little nugget in there. Is just the amount of work you put into educating the prompt and the thread is
Mhm.
going to really create a lot of value, and get an account where you can save it over time, because once you've taught it that, you can come back at any point in time and ask it to do more things, right? So if you've taught it your brand, who you are, what your values are, your vision, your voice, your tone, your personality, and it
Mhm.
gets you and you get to a place where you're liking what it's kicking out, you can go back anytime, say, "Hey, write a LinkedIn post about the following." And it can
Mhm.
be very spot on to at least get to a place where you go, "Great, those are all our first drafts. Throw them in a
Mhm.
document. Let's run
Yeah.
them by the copy team." And something that would have taken weeks now takes hours at
Mhm.
most. And you're at least at a point where now you're polishing and you're going back to that idea of, yes, some of the stuff it writes, it's not accurate. I find a lot of it's like vague. It's like, no, no, no. I got some very specific stuff we can talk about right here. But it knows how to write the way people want to hear it. And I would say better than myself. I'm kind of similar to
Definitely
you.
better than me.
Yeah, yeah, same. I'm
Yeah.
anytime I'm copy editing or copy proofing,
Yeah.
it's a dangerous place. But I think getting that first version and getting it in is
Mhm.
like, that's enough that the content team is now just polishing versus having to
Right.
understand what's in my brain or some big concept. So that's where I feel like it's been a really powerful tool, and it goes so far as to even be really good for mood boarding visuals for projects too.
Mhm.
So I love just taking in, hey, here's some inspiration, and just
Mhm.
feeding it 4 or 5 images, right? Like the style tiling and mood boarding part of things, to just throw stuff in and see what comes back. Very
Mhm.
low lift to kind of have it generate things. Now make that look like a website. Like, yes, the text is going to be garbage and the image, you can't use it, but you can have it be a visual that your client looks at and goes, that I love the direction you're going there. And you go, okay, great, make like 20 more of those and let's see if we like
Mhm.
them more or less.
Mhm.
And it gives you bumpers, which you would appreciate, is like when there's an existing brand guide or at least a really good mood board, you don't have to explore so many different creative outlets, right?
Mhm.
If it's, oh, we love watercolor, but we also love this thing, like you have so many things to explore to make them finally choose a direction, that helps
Mhm.
our team finalize kind of a look and feel that we know the client likes, and then we can kind of spend more time on less, um, which I
So
think is great.
my last AIGA talk on AI, um, I did it with Josh Hassan of Look Mysteries, San Diego agencies. He does a lot of really cool, innovative tech stuff. And he said something that always stood out. He goes, what we're becoming is more of like these creative conductors in some way, right? It's the director conductor in a way that when it comes to being efficient and being able to use this technology, we're able to like sometimes get better results than, especially image wise, on these stock sites. And
Yeah.
I'll use that same client as an example. We already agreed we were going to do a photo shoot of him, right? Like we want a real photo of him with, some in a scenario and this and that. And I'm like, all right, I'll go on Unsplash and iStock and get it. Da, da, da. But it was far, like I was able to get things so much quicker and more spot on to my concept using Midjourney than I did any of those stock sites.
Hmm.
Any of them. I was able to get the prompts, like kind of dial it in a little bit.
Yeah.
And then I was able to like generate that mood board for the shot list that was so spot on. And then, the conversation with the photographer was like, look, this is just a direction. I don't, yeah, we want him to kind of be in a cafe and we'd like that natural lighting to come through, but,
Yeah.
take your creative freedom and make it look something so much better. But it was very useful and very efficient for like a mood board and a shot list for a real photo shoot.
Yeah. It's funny. I've done just some random house projects and it's similar. I'm digging around next door and I'm digging around online architecture sites. It's like, look, I just need kind of a Spanish modern, dark floors, white counters, natural light, nature, raw wood, what, and the stuff. I mean, everything I'm looking at now is all AI generated kitchens. They're not even real, but it's like that's the kitchen I would love to have, right? Or a backyard. So it's crazy how much you can just prompt it and just chase what's kind of going in the right direction, and what you get back. Like you said, we've accepted stock photography. We've accepted that idea. So what's the difference, right? If it's somebody else's agency we're pretending is our own, or it's AI creating that image, what's the difference? It's not exactly what we said it was, or we're alluding to the idea that it was, but the reality is that's the way we have to be able to capture and get visual.
And every creative that I've been having a conversation with, I did a talk with Magnetic Creative, the San Diego-based agency, David Carrillo.
Yeah.
And, we were having the same kind of talk, and he showed me like some of his pitch decks that he was using AI for again, the mood boards in the direction, and getting the client to buy off a real photo shoot. And they just took it, and then they're like, okay, this is the mood, this is kind of the shot list, and how we're going to do the real photo shoot. And it made them money. Like, and that's the thing, like, if you're able to embrace it and use it in your way as this tool, you can learn how to make like your business grow and generate, higher quality like work. And so I don't know, I just really try to sell, going back to the thing, try to increase the approachability of the technology and kind of get over that hump of fear.
Yeah, I like that. Let's jump into that idea of jumping in. How do we help smaller teams, right? So a lot of people that are going to listen to this are going to be smaller, either fundraising teams, creative teams, small budgets. I'd love to think through some advice that we have for them in terms of getting started, right? If they're going to jump in, what are some areas they can jump into in using AI to kind of make their jobs easier, or really to fund the mission, right? Like how can they get started on using some of this technology to, in the end, just create a higher revenue stream without adding more work to their plate?
I think the Google Gemini and ChatGPT are probably the easiest ones, the most approachable. Midjourney can be a little more intimidating as far as, especially Discord, right? The platform itself, and that's probably a higher learning curve to get in and start kind of getting started creating images. I did try Leonardo with imagery, and I don't like it as much as Midjourney, but it's not as hard to get in and start experimenting with creating images off that platform, Leonardo. Bit more approachable, but I would recommend just people like using those text-based platforms like ChatGPT and Gemini to just try to become familiar with having the conversation with the AI.
Yeah.
It can feel awkward, like you're picking up your phone and you're literally like using the chat GPT like talking interface, and it can just feel a little awkward. You're like talking to this computer like this. And so trying to get used to like the language and
Yeah.
and as you build that confidence and that ease, then it becomes not as awkward.
Hmm.
So that would be my recommendation. Like try to use those two platforms to become familiar with the technology. But then again, like I mean, Gmail has AI built right into it. Like we're using AI in our email all the time in different
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah. Speaking of email too, I mean, I think I've been surprised at how well it will do if you prompt it with marketing tasks. Like, hey, and my first advice is to teach it things. Before you ask it stuff, you could always tell it things. Hey, this is who we are. This is what we do, this is what we care about. I'm working on this. Like communicate to the AI. This is what I'm trying to do. And I want you to understand that where I'm coming from. And now as that person, as a professional here working on the following thing, I want to write a campaign for my donors and I want to thank
Mhm.
them and I want to ask for a gift. And I want it to be a 3 to 5 email series with a couple LinkedIn posts all around this story of so and so. And you could paste it in and you could say,
Mhm.
hey, tell me what you got. And it'll kick back a bunch of info. You could stop it if you don't like it. You can regenerate
Mhm.
it. You can change it. But what I've actually found, it goes really far being relatively vague, but in the marketing task space, right? Write a journey, write a handful of touch points about the following thing. So that's another space I would encourage people is,
Yeah.
that was two in one. First is just teaching it and holding on to what you teach it. Give it
Right.
your mission statement, your vision statement. It can dig around the web. It can learn about you. Then when it talks about you, it's going to know a lot and it's not going to be as,
Mhm.
as vague or off voice and tone. But then second, to really give it broad tasks and let it write those first drafts of your campaign brief, of your ideation. Give me ideas for this campaign. You can give it the actual details and ask it for titles, ask it for description. So I'm with you. I think that the language piece is definitely a good one and really just toy with prompt writing, which is what
Yeah.
all of our children will be doing when they graduate
I know.
college.
Yeah. It's to me, I think it's so fascinating to think what our future, 5 years is going to be like with this technology.
Yeah, it's
Um,
wild, right?
I mean, yeah, it's wild. And yeah, I mean, the train's left the station. That's all I can say.
Yeah, it has. And I think
Uh,
we talked about it a bit too. I think if you want to get ahead on anything, it's defining what your brand is going to want to do with it, right?
yeah.
Because we work with large journalistic organizations like Pulitzer, where it's like, that's a no. Like, we're journalism. We do not use AI and fake journalism,
All
right? Like,
right.
that's a limit. But there are others who are telling stories about people halfway across the world that they can't photo shoot, but they have a photo, they can work with that story and they can build upon that, right? So I think organizations are going to need their kind of DEI policy for AI, even if just to tell their design teams and tell people like, we don't use stock, we don't do this, we do
Mhm.
use AI. I
Mhm.
think that'll be good too. And you said it's a little more technical. I think some could maybe start to get into the idea of doing the imagery. I think again,
Mhm.
it just goes back to the complexities of those scripts, right? If you're going to write it and have it draft you some emails, that's a lot easier than, hey, I want to do a photo of a young woman who's in this scenario and she doesn't have food and she's in a hut or however you need to describe it. It takes a lot more effort. Then you have the style of the photo, the lighting. Like there's a
The
lot to that prompt.
lighting, the aperture speed, like you can get real crazy,
Yeah.
especially if you're a photographer creative like David Carrillo from Magnetic. He is a photographer designer. And
Yeah.
so he like gets so specific with like the way that he includes
Yeah.
all of his details around photography. Like I said, aperture speed and all the like, angles and all this crazy stuff. That's way past me. I'm all like,
Yeah.
phew, so he gets very, very specific results based off of how he uses the technology.
Yeah.
I think it's really cool.
Well, and I think also feeding it the next kind of level, if you're going further, is then feeding it images that you have. I love that too. So whether
Yeah.
you're just
Totally.
stylistically doing it or like, this is the
Mhm.
character of what I'm
Yeah.
going to ask you for. And I'd like you to put her into the following scenarios. Um, those are, I think, all the ways that we're all toying with it, right? The technologies,
Mhm.
every week there's another, 4.4, 4.5. Like they're all
Mhm.
enhancing and solving problems, and hopefully someday they're going to
Yeah,
get five
I know.
fingers on each
All the
hand,
fingers right now.
and
Uh,
every like wave of a coat doesn't like
yeah.
disappear somewhere, so have some random buckle off to the side or something. It's getting there.
Yeah.
We're almost there.
Or, as far as designers go, and just use generative AI in Photoshop. Just experiment with that.
Yeah.
It's super easy. Even if you just want to experiment with like changing a small feature on an image or replacing a background, those are really easy ways of getting used to the technology as a designer or photographer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Uh, well, we're pushing up on the hour. How can people follow you and kind of the work that you're doing? I think it's worth
Yeah.
doing. I think for anybody who's looking around, I think you're going to be pioneering this stuff for the next few years. So how can they
Thank
follow
you.
you and
Appreciate
check out
it.
your work?
Yeah, I mean, I'm directing people to my portfolio site, and that's got. I'm always writing new articles, especially around this area, creative and AI. So my website is the letter D, the number five, IVE.com. So D5.com.
Love it. And we'll have
Yeah.
your LinkedIn attached to the
And my
video as well,
LinkedIn.
so
Yeah,
people can
yeah.
find you
Definitely
there
go to
too.
my LinkedIn. You can also find me on Instagram, but you'll probably see more photos of my dog.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of peeled out of Instagram and I realized I don't post. I'm not posting anything that anybody on Instagram wants to pay
Yeah.
attention to.
Yeah,
So
I mean, I post some creative stuff every now and then on Instagram, but
yeah,
it's a little bit of a mixture. But yeah,
yeah,
LinkedIn and
not in
my
following
personal.
me. So
Yeah, man.
that's cool. Well, hey, I appreciate your time. Did we miss anything? Anything else you want to touch
I think
on?
that's good. I just, again, I like to follow it up with just dig in, man. Don't be afraid to try it.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised how much you might enjoy using the technology. And then you can make your own decisions of how you want to apply it to your professional life and maybe even your artistic life. So, yeah.
And personal. I mean, I think once you get it, light bulbs start going off with all the different
Mhm.
things you can have it do to build all sorts of stuff for
Oh,
personal
for
rhythms, for work rhythms, and for organizations who are maybe taking a policy of being a little standoffish to it. I
mhm.
would encourage you to let the creatives that are either in house or that you're working with to explore it and just allow that to be an open door, right? You may not be ready just yet, but it is evolving so quickly. So I'd encourage organizations to look at it as a way to extend your ability to put creative out there that's going to bond to your potential donors, that's going to
Yeah.
resonate and build the emotional connection people have to you. And I think there's ways that you can make that amazingly authentic and accurate and true to life in a way that we just haven't been able to do before. So
Well said, Javan. I couldn't agree. Yeah, I couldn't agree anymore with that. Yeah, totally.
beautiful. All right, gang. Thanks for watching. Tune in
Thank you.
next time. Cheers.